medical evacuations. So let us listen attentively, and we will have an opportunity of asking the doctor the good questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith.
Great, thank you so much. And this, as they always say, is the graveyard shift. So let me just tell you what is happening to you at this moment in time. The food's gone in. The blood vessels are saying hello. So they're drawing the blood from the brain down to here so they can help with digestion of the food. So what I did early on during lunch is I was walking around seeing how you're piling up on the plate. So I can see proactively who will be sleeping shortly, and I'll keep an eye on it. All right, my name is Wayne Smith. I'm an emergency physician. And I've been involved in about 30 years now in the pre-hospital field in disaster medicine. I'm also part of the panel that helps with MRCC, particularly when it comes to making the decisions for medical evacuation. I really think there are three lessons I would like to get across today. The first one is to listen to the voice on the shoulder. And I'm going to go through a case study which has changed the way I look at things. The postprandial lesson I've given you already. And then I want us to think about is what you do on a daily basis. So earlier we were hearing about the issue about resources. And if we are finding it stretched today to deal with one or two difficult cases with a single patient, it doesn't bode well for going ahead into the future. All right, so I want to come with that type of process as we run through it.
Yeah, sure.
Can I get the next slide, please?
Just dim the lights, please.
There is a projector thing that it doesn't seem to want to do very well. Next one.
No, we're not gonna see.
All right, so for me, this is probably one of the most important slides. What we send depends on what is best for the patient and what is best for the rescuer. And I'm going to come back to this slide because we've utilized these resources in the past. Next slide, please. You jumped back. There we go. All right, so let me use a case study. This is a BO-105, Romeo Mike Romeo. I was the medical officer that dispatched this aircraft to an accident in Harlem many, many years ago. Unfortunately, we had a catastrophic loss of the aircraft with an accident, and there's lessons to be learned. And I thought hard about putting these slides up, but I think this is the ideal audience to look at these lessons and lessons that we can learn from this. Next slide, please.
The head was not
Let me try. No, it's not doing it. I'm going the wrong way, obviously. Okay, we're back to the house that Jack built. No, it's not doing it. Maybe if you guys can just do it for me, please. Man. Okay, next slide. All right, the story, you can go to the next one. Okay, that was the date. I was the medic that dispatched the aircraft. It was a fairly new program based in George. It was manned, the aircraft was manned by a pilot with lots of hours, but not lots of hours on type, with volunteer crew that were enthusiastic. So that's the first point that I'm wanting to pick up on. We dispatched at that time, and the little voice that evening was saying to me, a cold front has just passed through. So I listened to that little voice. We were getting close to sunset. I listened to that little voice. And I raised those concerns with the pilot and the crew, who said, they're good to go. They're good to go. A new program, they want to fly, they're enthusiastic crews. Next slide, please. All right, they picked up a patient, a young lady with a fractured femur, and they took her to George Hospital. Why did we fly in the first place? Because the EMS crew by road had responded to the incident. The ambulance hit a kudu. So the paramedic car had to stop, the advanced life support car stopped, so the ambulances by road were not going to get there. So now we start seeing a whole lot of things lining up in the cheese model. Got an enthusiastic crew, new pilots, lots of hours, but not on type. Weather coming in, and then the road transport gets involved in the accident. Next slide, please. 9-year-old female patient from the United States was uplifted. Carry on. And now we start seeing that maybe there's a problem. Because quite a long time later on, the aircraft now communicating with Eden Control to give updated positions. And then it's reported overdue. Next slide. And we start search and rescue. All right, you can carry on. So it had a CFIT, a controlled flight into terrain. We tried to get location utilizing mobile data, and eventually with the PC-12, we managed to find it, and that's where the aircraft hit the mountain. Next slide, please. That was the horrific sight. So we can either see something like this and move on, or we can see something like this and change our behavior and change the way we think of doing things. And I've opted to do the latter. So I want to talk about how it's changed my behavior. Next slide, please. That was the flight where it should have gone. They were obviously up and down the mountain trying to find a way over the pass. And unfortunately, that's what happened. Next slide, please. So was this the Swiss cheese model? Are we as search and rescue colleagues moving into the Swiss cheese model? Are we pushing boundaries because we don't necessarily have the enthusiasm or the platforms, but we've got the enthusiasm? Every speaker so far has thanked the volunteers who do tremendous work, but are we giving them the resources to do the work with? Are we pushing boundaries? All right. So where are the factors that I think was fitting into this cheese model? We can just go through it. New program, as I've mentioned. New paramedic, super enthusiastic. Greg knows my concerns about super enthusiastic at times. Next one. Frontal system. Next one. Metro responded, had the MVA. Next one. Okay, moving into sunset. Okay, distance to fly was 8 kilometers. It took them over 40 minutes and they still couldn't get over the top. All right. So there's the crew. And this morning, as I sat preparing my slides with a cup of coffee in my hotel, I was thinking to myself, do I show this? And I thought, yes, I'm going to show it. Because they've taught us a lesson. Lest we forget it, they have taught us a lesson. They did nothing wrong. They were enthusiastic. They had the right tool for the trade. And a whole other thing started going wrong. And I think our responsibility as search and rescue now is to start seeing where things potentially can go wrong. I'm hearing a whole lot of red flags go up with the earlier speakers about resources, about time to get to incidents, etc., etc. And I do believe we can do things differently. Next slide, please. Right, that's my daughter. And there she's sitting with Inco as an African grey. And this picture is that voice on the shoulder. I said to you that there was a voice on the shoulder. They were saying, check this, check that, going over the mountain, sunset, etc., etc. So when I'm doing work now for the MRCC, who seems to be taking over the vast majority of my time, I don't know if the ships wait for me to be on call or something, but there's lots of those, or Jared sends them through. I find myself listening to the voice on the shoulder. Recently, as 2 weeks ago, there was a cruise liner, 80-year-old, that had fallen and fractured her arm. The couple on board had doctor on board, and the request came through to lift her off the cruise liner at 2 o'clock in the morning. The voice on the shoulder said, it's not worth the risk. I've got the doctor, there's no neurovascular fallout. So I listened to the voice. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to listen to the voice. Carry on, please. So what do we listen for? As I said in that very first slide, medevacs to me are very simple. I am a simple person. I need to keep it clear. It's what's good for the patient, what's good for the rescuer. And we can carry on quickly with the next 4 or 5. What is the clinical benefit? Next, please. Accessibility. Does the aircraft or platform mean accessibility? Is it a capability thing we need? Is it speed? And the last thing that I worry about, which is what Jared and the Department of Transport worry about, is cost. Okay? But obviously deploying the incorrect resource can cost a lot of money. If we can move on, let's unpack a couple of these. So this one is a patient that's had a heart attack on top of Table Mountain. A doctor on the scene told the patient, or told the paramedic was wrong. This is on a mountain. Now, anything that happens on a mountain, no one can fly unless we've got the whole of Mountain Club and Wilderness Search and Rescue and all the caribs and ropes on board. But here the communication was, guys, I can land the aircraft, put the patient in the back, and he was in Constantiaberg having stents put in within 15 minutes. Okay, so where the resource met the requirement. If we could move on, please. And one. Okay, there's a whole lot of medical criteria. The colleagues that are medically, you know these criteria. There's the coma scales, and we'll just quickly go through a whole lot of them. Yeah, we can carry on, go through, that's fine. Yeah, we all know those things. And from our perspective, we'll make use of that. Okay? So these two guys look as if they're sitting at Kirstenbosch, about to go into a Just Ginger concert. Okay? Very relaxed, unbelievably relaxed, easygoing. Hey man, was the way they spoke to us. Next slide. All right, now they're not looking so comfortable. Next slide. Definitely not looking comfortable. If we go back one. Also that one. So this is sunset about to come across. We've got the rescuers about to up top there. And the longer, the more dangerous. So now the rescuers, I've got patients that are at that moment in time. Rescuers down after hours, long abseiling at risk. Initially tried with a smaller helicopter, we couldn't do it. And then we brought in the bigger helicopter who literally pendulum the climber in to get to them. All right, next slide, please. And there's the rescuer being pendulum in, keeping in mind no point in time can he connect to the mountain because then the helicopter is attached. So this was done with the Oryx helicopter. It had the power, it had the capability, it had everything we needed to do the operation. 2 days ago, we had someone hitting a mountain. Request for an Oryx, is nothing available. Things are changing in a very short period of time. Next slide, please. And there they're coming up with his hey man attitude. The sad thing is when we dropped him at the field, not even a thank you. Felt quite keen to take him back and drop him back there and him spend the night up there. Right, here's another one. This is a massive storm in Cape Town Harbour. This vessel's run aground, everybody's panicking. Getting the team together, we heard about communication, speaking to the port captain, speak to the salvors, speak to everybody. That vessel's going to go nowhere. It's going to be bruised a little bit. So we communicated to these guys. Unfortunately, they didn't quite understand. And if you look at the bottom, you can see someone's jumped. So someone's in the water there. All right, so now we go with firemen in full bunker gear, standing to try and rescue, which is also the wrong equipment. Okay, so we learn from these things. So here I was more perturbed about what about the rescue team? Next slide. Next morning, weather cleared, we could manage the risk. And I think that's the critical thing. We need to manage that risk. And now it's heroic to go in that day and run the risk of losing our staff, losing that enthusiastic response, which is what we as A personalities all do. Next slide, please. Can you believe this? That we had once upon a time, I was on call when we had Congo fever outbreak in Oudtshoorn. I needed to bring a patient that was bleeding very badly back, and our biggest isolator didn't fit in the citation we were flying on that stage. So the Air Force immediately from 35 Squadron in Cape Town gave me a TP or Dakota, and we went to go fetch the one patient. Then a whole lot of other patients started presenting, phoned, and they flew a C-130 down from Johannesburg for me. The ambulances loaded them, and this at Aisterpark offloading all the patients. There's actually a funny point to this one as well. The flight engineer was panicking about it. What happens if an accident happens and this blood and virus infects him? So if you look, he made us put duct tape over all parts of that vehicle. I tried to explain to him that if the aircraft crashes, it burns and the protein of the virus denatures and it will be dead, and so probably would he, but he didn't like that. He had no sense of humor on that one. But gents and ladies, that is the C-130 of the Air Force that responded immediately. Okay. Then, okay, sometimes speed. Here's a patient as well being lifted off and being taken to private hospital with cardiac problems. Next slide. There's the date. Request comes through to go to Tristan da Cunha. A frigate left Simonstown with medics on board within 24 hours. Could we do that today? All right, so we need to start considering that the voice I'm listening to is the best thing to send there, maybe is not possible. Okay, next slide. So when I put the call out for the medics to go on this trip, I think they imagined this as putting their feet up around the swimming pool and drinking pina coladas. The first message that came through is, Doc, there's no windows on this vessel. And then the seasickness started. Next slide. But look at this. South African Air Force, South African Navy, medical services, all together and made a difference to 11 people's lives. We don't have that luxury anymore, which is what I think we need to be considering in further discussions here. Sure, we can't buy frigates all over the place, but we need to think on how we can do things, okay? Because this was available 2013. Next slide, please. Is this a safe alternative? And this is what happens when these calls come through. Do I want to send the aircraft out and the weather's not great? Do I want to send this vessel out or something similar? And I found out yesterday that our crew went out to the National Sea Rescue Institute yesterday, and they managed to get the patient off onto the vessel, but then the rescue swimmer fell and landed up falling between the rescue boat and the tanker. Are we listening to the voice on my shoulder? Are we listening to the voice on my shoulder? There seems to be an enthusiastic group of private boat owners. I spoke to someone earlier that wants to get involved in rescue. We can't stop them. But if we're not careful, we're going to kill them, or they're going to kill themselves. It's another thing we need to consider. So is this a safe alternative? This organization does tremendous work, and if it wasn't for them, I don't know what I would do in dealing with some of these cases. Next slide, please. Okay, an idea of bringing someone on board, and the next one. And that's the kind of predicament they face. This is wonderful, nice calm seas. If the helicopter can't go out, then the seas ain't calm. Then the winds are up and all the rest of it. And we are lucky in the Western Cape, we have got access to helicopters. When the calls come through and it's the wild coast, then I get cold shivers. Patients presenting with acute chest pain, shortness of breath, and it's going to take me hours to get anybody to come and bring them off. Next slide, please. So yeah, I must say, I think the strength is in the partnerships. You can see all the organizations, from the ships agents, MRC, Telcom, to the four of us that give the clinical advice. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to call FPS. And sometimes it is an easy call. And for me, an easy call as a doctor is that there's a good outcome for the patient. Next slide, please. And sometimes I feel like I'm a vet. I can talk to the patient or to the skipper, I don't know what he's saying. And I found now taking pictures and sending me a picture, they say, no, the patient's up and he's looking good, but he's not, he's dead. I can see he's dead. They don't want to leave him on the vessel. But you can make a whole lot of diagnostics on that. And you've got to be very, very careful. So sometimes we get caught. The next picture was taken about less than a month ago. This is one of my colleagues that was on, Professor Geduld, and she shared the picture with me. If you can just move on to the next one, please. So this one was a person that burnt their hand. She asked all the questions. She wrote all the documentation needed. There was no TMAS. The captain, no, he's not worried about the patient. The patient's fine. It's just this hand. No major concern for the captain. No breathing difficulties. Just waiting. Hurry up with his medevac. So we said, okay, can you just please send us a picture of the patient? Next slide, please. That's the patient. Okay, for the medical people, this is inhalation burns, difficult intubation. You're going to lose this patient if you don't get a move on. So this is the kind of difficult environment. Now that comes through to you. What do you do if you don't have the resources to do it with? Next slide, please. So what are the challenges in closing? Language. We can overcome language. There's something called Google Translate, apparently. You can look at your phone, listen to it, tells you the story. We link up in Cape Town with the embassies. We did it during the World Cup. We can do it today. So we have the embassies giving us the information. Often there's a lack of adequate medical information. We've drawn up new forms. We submit it to Jared, and that's going through the process to see if we can get better information. I've alluded to this lack of truthful information where they don't want a body left on board. So the patient's eating breakfast, but in reality, he died 4 days ago. Lack of medical resources on board. Not everything is a beautiful container ship with all the systems in place. Sometimes that's not the case. I feel helpless at times, and I don't like feeling helpless. I feel helpless because I know the patient's dying and there's nothing I can do to help. That is one of the worst feelings anybody can have in their career. And I've been feeling more helpless more often of late. But there are some rewards. Next slide, please. This is a young family from Cape Town that sailed right across and quite close to the Bahamas. And Jared, I know I dealt with on this call. So the son on board started developing signs of, they were worried about an appendicitis. He was very young, so it wasn't my main concern, but I was worried about an obstruction. And we tried to get assistance from the equivalent MRCC on that side, who weren't really interested. But to get a message back from Dad to say we as a collective made a difference. That's rewarding. Those are rewarding. Okay? But we don't often get that, and we don't go and seek it. But that helplessness I spoke about is coming through a little bit more often now. Next slide, please. The rewards are great. This was medical advice given to a New Zealand crew member. I had to quickly switch my phone on. I was driving the car. My family was in the car. This guy's language left a lot to be desired. So he had broken up a fight between two of his crew. So he sent me the pictures, and we spoke about how to suture it and could talk it through it. And I was away somewhere, and my wife got a phone call to say someone's dropped off crayfish tails. And I tried to declare that as a provincial employee in the little book of declaration of receiving gifts. But I did declare, and we did enjoy. Okay. Next slide, please. So I'm going to finish off with this. I've added another bubble to it. It's all about the patient. It's all about the rescuer. But now we are dealing with more incidents with less resources. We cannot hide that away. We can't lift it under the carpet. It is the reality. And if to us today, I worry what's going to happen when we have the bigger vessels. Yes, over the weekend, I was doing the Formula E, and I drove past the harbour, and there were 3 massive cruise liners. If anything happens just close to Robben Island, how are we going to react to that? If we're battling today, it should be a red flag that we need to think about how we can do things differently. And I'm not coming just forward with a whole lot of challenges. I'm coming forward with that maybe we should realize as a country, we don't have all the resources, but we also need to break down the blinkered visions that we've got. So we have a whole lot of firefighting helicopters working on fire, and they fly up and they throw water on fires. Then we got a couple of medical helicopters of different colors. Then we got law enforcement helicopters. Can you imagine if we put some of that money together and had strong platforms that could do multi-skill and do a whole lot of those things? That's just on the aeromedical components of it. Okay? Instead of turning the private operators away who want to get involved in fetching patients from sea with their vessels, we're not going to stop them. But maybe we should embrace them and take them and teach them and help them. And the last slide, please. I'm hoping this slide doesn't become a museum piece. That's the last time we practice with the Air Force. Because it is sad, sad, sad to see that we can't get access to these platforms anymore. So I'm going to leave it at that negative note. But the positive note, I've been watching the audience, and not a single person was overcome by postprandial. You kept your blood supply running up and not to the stomach. I can see that changing shortly. All right. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Wayne Smith, thank you very much. Very exciting. The next speaker is who's going to talk to us on the role of the health department in search and rescue. Is going to be Dr. Ahmed. So we are blessed this afternoon. Doctors are keeping us awake. Thank you, thank you. Let us give him a round of applause.
This house keeps on coming. How can I remove this house?
I have my presentation on. Thanks. Well, you do change the slides for me as well.
Okay.
I hope I keep you guys awake. You know, that's after that enthusiasm from Dr. Smith. You know, I hope you guys don't fall asleep. I'm like a typical government employee who gives you long lectures. But colleagues, just while the slides are coming on, I'd like to recognize the Deputy Minister in his absentia, all the DGs, all protocol observed. Thank you for having me. A bit about me. I'm 23 years in the public health sector, started in the Northwest Department of Health and moved over to the National Department of Health. I serve, I don't know for my sins, but I serve on various platforms on the HPCSA. I serve on boards of the Special Olympics, on the Gift of the Givers Board of Trustees, and represent the department at the Net Joints and various other stakeholders. While my presentation is coming on, did you find it?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, let me see. This one.
Okay, yes, doctor. Yes.
That's some exercise for me. Eh? I'm just going to give you an overall aspect of how the Department of Health
With that house,
contributes
it
to
keeps
search
on
and
coming.
rescue. And I'm going to give you the status of the public emergency medical services that we have in the country and how we integrate into search and rescue. And to Dr. Smith as well, you know, he's raised really pertinent points, which I will actually cover, that we need to face the reality a lot in some of the aspects in terms of resources as well. You can move to the next slide. You can move to the next one. Okay, cool. All right, just so people understand as well, emergency medical services, as we know, is not just one component. People misinterpret it and just think EMS, especially from a government sector, is just ambulances that respond. And that's it. And they never come, and the government entities are always late. And it isn't that. We need to understand the package of services, emergency medical services run in the country. You can look at the 11 packages of services that we as emergency medical services, as government institutions, contribute to. And all these packages contribute to search and rescue in all 9 provinces. So we have emergency communication centers, we've got ambulatory services, which you see in your community responses, and then we have interfacility transfers. We've got medical response, we've got aeromedical services, medical rescue, pre-patient transport, disaster medicine, College of Emergency Care, which means into training, events management, and general management. So it's very important, as you can see, that it's not just the focus of EMS that attends only to rescue scenarios or so. They are running a lot of other things that are currently going in the background in terms of their package of services. You can move to the next slide, please. So EMS never had regulations in the past, and there were huge issues. We'd have private services, would be EMS during the day, during the weekend, rescuers, and at night, towing services and mortuary services running as one service because there was no regulation. In 2017, the EMS regulations came out, and at least we had a government governance structure to regulate EMS practices in the country. That regulation was promulgated, it's been gazetted, and on the 2nd of December 2022 was signed into law by our minister. And it's important to have regulations where we never had regulations. And regulations are important because regulations bring in a lot of legality. It's always nice to go and do the rescues, and we see that when we have search and rescue efforts. Everyone wants to run in, they want to do the rescue. But when someone passes away, then what happens? Then we have to look at the medical legal aspect. If the person was trained, has the person had enough sufficient training? Has he been retrained? When last did he do the qualification? And the reality is we don't do that because just because it's EMS or we got the rescue for qualification or we got 100 pages on us, we just run in, but we don't think of the legal aspect. So it was very, very important to bring this regulation into effect, and we will be reviewing this regulation. And with this regulation, when we're reviewing it in this year, we're going to be bringing in the ARCC, the MRCC, because these are important points whereby when we respond, how to preserve evidence, I mean, how not to take photos on scenes, some regulations that are from the SASA, Department of Transport, needs to be incorporated in this regulation. And so people are familiar with it. Because to be honest with you, I didn't know about SASA. I didn't know about the ARCC or MRCC when I was in the Northwest Department of Health. When I moved over to the National Department of Health, the reality sunk in and I started understanding the systems. And especially with the ARCC, we put a lot of work into it to regulate it because as much as we have all the rescuers, a system needs to be in place. With the ARCC, especially the Department of Health as well, the EMS, we the governance legislation that needs to be called when rescues happen. We need to be the point of contact. We need to know where the private sector fits in. We need to know where the volunteer services fit in. Because as I mentioned, it's happened in the past. Everything looks good when we're doing the work. But when one of the rescuers die, what's the question we get asked? Reality. Oh, but it was a government's responsibility. They are legislated to do it. So these are important points, and it's so good that we're having this conference. And once the regulation gets reviewed, all of these aspects can be ironed out, and we have a structured, coordinated response together with all stakeholders. Next slide, please. This is just a bit of an overview just to see in all our 9 provinces, we've got already inspectorates that are looking at ambulances, that give tokens to ambulances, that they're compliant every month or so. And in that aspect, they also look at the systems and the structure, and that there's governance in the EMS system as well. Next slide, please. Just to cover EMS safety is very important as well, and that covers a lot of what Sainki and a lot of our previous speakers were speaking about, mental health. I mean, COVID has shown us the mental health aspect in our healthcare workers, what they went through. So also coming into rescues, there's a lot of mental health, proper counseling we need to deal with. EMS has set up now what we have, an EMS safety forum. The Western Cape College of Emergency Care has been our pilot project where they've started, and that will be rolled out to all EMSs. And that's just how to deal with the things we see. Myself and Iva just arrived back from Turkey on the response to the earthquake, and we lost one of our colleagues on Monday. Not due to the Turkey, but he had a lot of personal issues. But it impacted the team a lot. I mean, me 23 years in the EMS industry and seeing these things, but these things do impact you. And it's important of looking at mental health, wellness, as well as just protecting our rescuers in general. Next slide, please. This is just a quick sum up of some of the incidences that we've had in terms of attacks on EMS. You can see Gauteng, KZN, and Western Cape being the largest with it. Move on. This is just the ambulances that the government has currently. As you can see, we've got 3,144 accredited ambulances running in the country. And we need to understand these resources are not, like I mentioned, in a package of services, not only responding to accidents. They're doing that rural call to those clinics, they're doing inter-facility transfers, they're doing plane patient transport. And it's a lot of things and a lot of extra resources we do need to assist. Yes, we need more staff, we need more ambulances, but the system is running as well. One thing I learned from COVID and what we done is when we did our presentation on COVID is we actually realized the resilience of the public healthcare system, because the public healthcare system showed how resilient it was in terms of our EMS, in terms of hospitals as well. And that was really important to stress during such a big pandemic. You can move to the next slide, please. This is just giving you just a snap view of the amounts of ambulances in the different area. Yes, I know there's a norm that the national norm of 1 ambulance per 10,000, but that's being re-looked at by myself and the team at the moment to try and just look at new norms for the EMS industry. Next slide, please. EMS infrastructure, you can see we've got 502 accredited EMS stations in the country currently. And we've got purpose-made stations where we've starting to build quite a lot of EMS stations in the future as well. You can move over. This is just giving on the EMS structure and the different types of stations where they're located in the country. We can move to the next one. And on the human resources, the public sector employs less than 15,000 employees, with the biggest employers of the public health sector, of the sector of emergency medical services. So we've got a lot of resources that are there. And we need to be training these resources and make them available, especially for search and rescue. One important thing to mention is, and I know it's a very sticky point, but this is robust engagements or conferences, is whose responsibility is search and rescue? Is it the EMS? Is it the fire services? Is it COCTA? Is it NDMC? These are questions that need to ask. But currently, as we're speaking, out of the 9 provinces in the country, 6 provinces, EMS does all the rescue, emergency medical services in the public sector. That place in Northern Cape, of other, if we go to Springbok, if there's no EMS, that person's going to be still waiting over his decomposed body for help to pull him out of the car. So that's why it's very important to have seen these regulations and where the training goes and where EMS fits and where all of these aspects need to be concentrated in terms of resources. Let's move to the next slide, please. So this just gives you a snapshot of the different types of qualifications that we have in the EMS industry. And many of them in terms of medical qualifications may have the short courses, but others do have the rescue capabilities. And the whole EMS industry had been changed. The whole academic, the way we're teaching EMS at the moment has changed. We've moved away from the short courses. We've moved on to a tertiary level, just so we can teach the practitioners rescue capabilities. But that's just a small part about it, as well as how to complement the rescue side and the medical side. Next slide, please. We have moved on to what we call corporate identity. If you go anywhere in the country, we've provincialized the EMS. You'll see the government EMS wearing green. We've restructured 112. We've removed 10177 to call for emergencies. 112 is the official number now to call for any emergencies. And what we've also done is we've removed, when you phone 112, that it goes to the service provider in terms of the Vodacoms or MTN, but goes to the ECC for EMS as well. And we've looked at the branding so that we can become like a national service. Eventually, we want to be a national service because, like Dr. Smith has said, if we have those resources, we can then use it effectively and all that funds can come to the national side. But we have moved on to a provincial service and we're implementing it and we're doing a soft transition as it goes on. We can move to the next slide, please. This is just showing that all the provinces have implemented it. We've also now looked at our CAD systems, which is computer-aided dispatching systems in the country at the moment, and lots of provinces have moved quite forward in terms of that. Let's move over. Coming to aeromedical services, you can see the types of aircrafts that we are using at the moment. But with aeromedical services, you can just move to the next slide for me while I talk. Thank you. So as you know, with the aeromedical services at the moment, what's the challenges we're finding is the provinces are having helicopters available to them that are on a 2-year contract, which we as government are paying a lot of money. We're actually paying 400 million over 2 years for 9 provinces, which is exorbitant. So our office has been tasked to look at the National Aeromedical Service, where all the funds will then get directed to the National Department of Health, and we look at having strategic aeromedical relationships where there's no provincial boundaries. Because the reality has happened. We'll have a helicopter based in Bloemfontein, but it wouldn't want to fly to Kimberley to assist in terms of any search and rescue or medical evacuations. Why? Because it's across the borderline. So we spoke and said, but are we not one country, one health? We shouldn't be able to have provincial borderlines. We're supposed to use these resources effectively. And believe me, between me and Dr. Smith, if we must sit down with 400 million, we can do a lot with 400 million that will be for 10 years instead of just 2 years. So we are re-looking at it. And just on that point from the conversations we had before, I would like to look at models abroad in terms of also response in the maritime industry. What can we look at, and we can try and see what is there out existing in other countries. We've put a team together and we'll be traveling just abroad to go and look at different models that other countries are using to bring back into South Africa, because the current model is not working. It's exorbitant to pay 400 million for over 2 years for 9 provinces, and some of the helicopters only work daylight hours, etc., etc. So it's aspects that we really do need to look at. Search and rescue capabilities. It's no use I have 3 helicopters in the Eastern Cape, but none of them have search and rescue capabilities, and all 3 can only work daylight hours, because the rescues don't only happen during the day. It happens 24 hours at any time. So those are important aspects as well. Let's move on to the next one. These are just our community ECCs, emergency communication centers. A lot of provinces have moved on now into CAD systems that can just assist as well. Gregory will really give you some insight into how this has been helping in terms of our responses, where the ECCs of the government really kick in when we have issues in different provinces and what the impact it does make. We can move to the next slide. Just plane patient transport. This is just a snap view. You can see Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, Gauteng, all of them moving to have plane patient transport systems to kick in. Just why I'm saying plane patient transport, these are our patients that need to move from clinics to tertiary or specialized service hospitals. We can't send a 1 million rand ambulance to go and take a walking patient in a rural area to a tertiary or upgrade facility. We need that to put plane patient transport systems in place, which we have implemented now, the Western Cape having a good health net and GSET, which is being launched by Gauteng at the moment and other provinces as well. So it's important just to give you that snapshot of the overall, so you also understand and not look at just EMS in terms of search and rescue, but the broad aspect of what the public sector does do. Next slide. This is just where programs have been implemented. Next slide. EMS education. So EMS, our colleges were white elephants, if I put it, in the last few years because we stopped the short courses. But then in a gazette 2 years ago, the Minister of Higher Education and the Minister of Health jointly had meetings, and the Department of Higher Education gazetted that the public colleges become higher education institutes. And our public colleges have now become higher education institutes, where the Western Cape has become the first one that will present the ECA 1 year course and the diploma, which is going to be a 3 year course now. KZN has also followed. But the whole idea of this is that our government colleges will now be able to train EMS personnel on the tertiary level. They'll be able to train rescue personnel. You'll be able to go there, it's tertiary qualifications, and you'll be able to get the qualification, further your studies to a master's, to a doctorate in this field as well. And it's important that our colleges, and it's a huge step for the government entity to become HEIs. I don't. It's just very difficult. But if you've been in the industry for many years, and you'll understand why the joy it's brought to us for public health institution to become a higher education institution, what the difference it does make. Next. This is just obstetric ambulances we have in certain areas of the province, of the country rather. Just for that, you can move to the next slide. These are just response time performances. You can move over. These are just giving you the percentage of response times we have in the different provinces at the moment. Way forward, it's just prioritizing a lot of funding towards NK infrastructure. We need a lot of resources at the moment in terms of infrastructure, EMS stations, equipment, all of those things. A fully planned patient transport service available. Once that is up and running, our primary response vehicles will be available to attend to all those emergencies, and effective emergency control communication centers, which you can tap into the province eventually. And at National Department of Health, we can have a snapshot of the country of what's happening. Next slide. I thank you very much. So I know it was just important to give you a snapshot of the Department of Health in terms of where we play a role in search and rescue, but I had to take you in a broader aspect so you could understand it from all different aspects in the Department of Health. I thank you.
Thanks. I think about that voice on the shoulder, and when the doctor was presenting it, similar position or what our decision, but that voice on your shoulder, I agree. You need to, in which I think it's Dr. Bam is going with regard, I don't know, upgrading or professionalizing the EMS services to the tertiary levels. I see in now has come on in leaps and bounds, where we're getting the students coming to for exposure in the ports and in with the NSRIs. So that's quite good. The question I'm wondering, and maybe on the expedition they're taking to go look at other services around the world, I know the NSRI does phenomenal work and has a certain level of capability, but I'm sure outside in the rest of the world there's water ambulances, and I'm thinking perhaps we can better equip our resources to take it a level up, where we can provide that basic, I think they know the acronyms better than I do, but the basic paramedic or advanced services on board vessels with certain amount of capability. So I'm really, the reason I say that is, I think somebody mentioned, I think Dr. Wayne mentioned earlier, the private industry is seeing this gap in the market, and it's becoming all and more difficult for us without legislation to keep those guys at bay, because if a vessel is making a request to have that service, we can't refuse it. But at this point in time, I think the NSRI
said early on about the workload and getting more. Pre-COVID, and I'm talking up to December 2019, the number of medivacs was sitting at X. By December of 2020, it had increased 150%, and our assets had decreased by 40%. Just to give you some kind of a picture as to what the reality is, South Africa was one of the few countries that continue to keep our borders open to seafarers in the Southern Hemisphere, which was a brilliant thing to do. But our resources cannot keep pace with that.
Okay, move to this corridor.
Yeah, maybe it's an elephant in the room, but I'm not from government. I'm in the private sector. We keep on talking about resources, and I've been around for a while. I was around when the Oceanos happened, and we know then what the Air Force accomplished. So, with horror, I see that your resources from a national defense force capability are getting less and less. I'm not sure if they're represented here today. I actually don't see any of the SANDF. But is there any light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, are we now going to exclude them from any possible emergency responses, medical, etc.? So maybe it's a question that can't be answered, but I'm just putting it out there. Thanks.
Thank you. I think let's end here on the first round. Then we can have maybe half a round.
Great. Thank you. I mean, maybe the last first. I hope not. I hope we don't exclude. Stuff, staff, and systems are the three things that drive everything. They've got the stuff. They've got the aircraft. They've got phenomenal staff members, phenomenal pilots. It just doesn't seem to be enough political will to get them in the air and to be there for the right reason. I think that's what needs to happen. We have got a phenomenal Air Force. We spent a lot of time in difficult situations. So I'm hoping we don't exclude them because we need them. The voice. I am so pleased that I heard someone in the audience say they've been thinking about the voice on the shoulder. Well, to answer Santi's question, that's what we need to do. I need to get up there, you need to get up, and all of us here need to be vulnerable. For far too long, EMS and pre-hospital are like cowboys don't cry. And by actually showing that we do, that it does get to us, that there are vulnerabilities, I think it is critical. And that's when the voice becomes louder. And we listen to the voice rather than being kind of gung-ho in a certain direction. I learned the hard way. When Netcare had their incident, 2 days later, I phoned Mandy Token. I didn't need to say anything. She was devastated. When that happens, it doesn't matter where and who you are. It's a very closed industry. But by sharing those colleagues up there and the voice, for me is important because it's getting to an audience. And if you can be a voice that gets it to other audiences, I think it's the way to go forward with that. I did a talk for our college they wanted to talk on trauma. And then I looked at the program. It was C-spine, fractures this complicated pelvis. And I entitled mine Trauma of Self. And I spoke about how I cried when we lost colleagues during COVID. And it was just hushed silence. No one wanted to admit or say anything to me, but they sent me messages saying, thank you for being vulnerable. And I think that's where we need to get to. On the water ambulance, and I'm going to ask on to make a call, but on the water ambulance, why do we want to develop a water ambulance? Why don't we strengthen the sea rescue component? Why don't every time the sea rescue goes out, it goes out with a medical component from the private EMS providers and or the state providers? Otherwise, we end up with tow truck vessels racing to a particular scene and standing on corners of ocean pathways. So just some thoughts of that. I really think, I'm going to leave it at that. I've got one last comment before I hand it over. I think kudos needs to be given to the MRCC chief and the ARCC chief and to the ex-ARCC chief. You guys bring professionalism in a very difficult environment. And I've shared it with both of you. I know it's a very difficult environment, but the resilience that we actually have got is something that we push on with. And I think Captain Keller said he's not sure how many more times we can put our hands into the resilience drum. And I think that's the voice that I'm hearing very loud in today's discussions. You got your own.
You got to be Justin Bieber.
Thanks a lot. I think it's important, just that last point with Dr. Smith raised as well with the ARCC, MRCC. I think how we structured everything over the last year or two has really given us a lot of structure, brought back the professionalism as well. And you can see the results. I mean, if Greg ever presented through to you, you'll see the results at the MRCC as well, how all the integrated services are working together and how important it is to have structure. And that's really, really important. Structure brings discipline, it brings respect, it brings everyone together for the right purpose. I'm not going to cover on other points. Just to mention, yeah, the South African Military Health Services and South African Air Force are very valuable components. We do sit around the same table most of the times. And it's definitely not in exclusion. They do play their part a lot. And I don't know if there's no representation here, but let me tell you, when we need them, they're there for us. And whatever resources are available, as you know, they engage with a lot of other things, and some things we can't discuss here as well. But they're very important component to search and rescue as well. And they really do assist us a lot. Coming down to the water ambulances as well, yeah, that's something we did look at, and it's, we need to do a proper study and look at a proper model. But these are good brainstorming, mind stimulating. But let's look at existing structures that we do have, and let's try and complement those structures and capacitate them. For me, South Africa has good structures. We just need to capacitate them and just rework and remodel some of them. Yes, we lack resources in certain aspects, but if we work together as government, private sectors, all volunteer services together, we have those capacities and capabilities to come together. Thank you. I think that covered my points.
Thank you. Just no. Yeah. On my side, I mean, there was a caution from you, Dr. Wynne, where you said the enthusiasm. Are you able to tell, I mean, the enthusiasm of yesterday compared to the enthusiasm of today? Any? There has been a cultural change. I think the country has not been stand still.
Yeah, I think what has happened is falls back on what the MRCC chief was talking about. The workload's gone up, the amount of resources has decreased. So the only way we can carry on responding to those type of incidents is with the volunteers that give freely of their time and that enthusiasm. All I think I'm suggesting is one needs to be careful that the enthusiasm is channeled correctly. Just after 9/11 happened, I went over to the United States for some training and met with the medical manager that looked after that whole 9/11 operation. He spent more time trying to manage volunteers that just wanted to be on site. That today they were medical volunteers. Tomorrow, when they didn't need medical, they needed people to cut the rhubarb. Then they were qualified metal cutters, metal workers, and people just wanted to give. And I look at our colleagues that lost their lives in those incidents and others, and we just need to make sure that enthusiasm is channeled in a safe manner, because the pre-hospital environment, the rescue environment, is not a safe environment by its very nature. And I think it's therefore dependent on the professional services and the government services and the private services to embrace, but to train and keep current those volunteers.
Thank you so much. I think there's a challenge to all of us. I think the issue of the culture of voluntarism, that's correct. How do we inculcate that? More especially because, I mean, this country is a great country. Look at the numbers of people that we have. But the culture of people I can be counted in as a volunteer. I think it's really not a national fabric that you can say, well, that's what that characterizes South Africa as a nation, that we are a nation that is willing to come and say, I can offer something, let me put a shoulder. So how do we inculcate the culture of volunteerism? I think we may not have an answer to it now, but let's just think, because if we're moving into the future, we may even need a different kind of volunteers, or a multidisciplinary type of volunteers who can bring in something into what we want to achieve. So let's just think about that. The next item is very exciting. I would like to invite the. Huh? No, you don't need tea. Sorry. Let's go back. But I'm going to give you a chance to grab your cup of tea and then you bring it in. 10 minutes, is it okay? Yeah. So you come back in 10 minutes with your cup of coffee. And then we'll set up, because I would need, the chiefs must come early. The chief of the RCC chiefs must come early, because I want to have them on here. They are going to have a conversation, sharing their challenges. It's going to be a lively discussion. We'll make it work. Thank you so much. Take a break for just.
These are the groups. I'm not sure what is the other day for.
10 minutes.
Eh?
Come back here, just 25.
Is there a way to pause a live video? There is no way to pause. You just end. You're gonna create a new one. Okay.